Greetings fellow artists, and welcome to this character design video where I will introduce you to an exercise I came up with after being horribly art blocked, overwhelmed, frustrated, and just so artistically debuffed. If you find yourself in a similar position, I hope this could give you a few ideas. This will be a talking heavy video with my drawing process in the background for those of you who like to draw or do chores along with me. If you are not interested in the backstory of this whole thing, you are welcome to skip to the time on the screen for the actual exercises. So let's start at the beginning. This is technically the second installment of my series where I redesign an old story I wrote when I was a teenager. The first video came out 5 months ago, which was a while ago, sorry if you want to check it out. But you do not need to watch it to understand this one. As a brief summary, the whole idea was based around the question, how would you combine the circus and the mafia into one coherent story? The conclusion I came to 5 months ago was the theme of family, which is relevant, I thought, to both the circus and the mafia. Since then, I've sort of been reflecting on the direction I took, and I realized it wasn't that interesting to me anymore. Family conflict-centric stories and historical settings rarely activate my brain cells when it comes to the media that I enjoy consuming, and I could not picture creating an original story in that direction anymore. So during this whole situation, I decided to go to a circus for the first time for research purposes. I honestly thought it was kind of silly that I embarked upon this decade-long creative journey about the circus when I had never ever gone to one and just knew about it in theory. So the circus was really fun, and it gave me lots of new ideas on how to move forward with my story. I learned that the circus itself is a storytelling vehicle. It is a performance with characters and a plot and a story, and so I thought, for my story, what if the circus was putting on a show about the mafia that was kind of like terrorizing their town? And that idea made a lot of sense to me, and it sounded a lot more fun to me than what was happening before. It was meta, it was satirical, there was potential for juicy character dynamics. And so, feeling quite inspired, I started organizing all of these loose ideas in Milanote. I actually asked them to be the sponsor for this video because I have been using them since 2021, and I found it quite helpful because I think non-linearly and in both pictures and words. And so if you're kind of like that, also let me tell you a little bit about it. Milanote is a tool for organizing creative projects. It's an online canvas designed to help you plan, brainstorm, and collaborate on ideas. Last time we broke down the story and themes, which I have laid out here, and I also have notes on what I want to edit for the next rounds. Specifically, I would like to work on the circus aspect of this project this time. So here's where the brainstorming started. It is a little bit chaotic. In the middle is my goal, which is to build a mafia story for the circus to tell, because the circus is a storytelling vehicle in itself. So I thought it would be interesting if the circus would do a satire on the mafia that would be very meta. So to do this, I need to combine circus acts with mafia archetypes, which I have listed down here. And so I've collected and organized a bunch of reference from all over the internet. And since there was a little bit too much, I have a bunch of subboards as well, where I'm just dumping stuff. And it's really quite easy to get anything from the internet into Milanote. Basically, you can copy paste anything, and they also have a web clipper. So you can see that anytime I hover over an image, this little save button appears. And what you can do is just click on this, and I can save it to any of my boards. You can see all of the ones I have here. And so that will appear right here, and now I can drag it in. I also use the mobile app. They recently just updated it to be exactly the same as what it looks like on web, which is really cool. I use this a lot when I'm stuck on a bus, in a line, or sometimes even when I'm in bed and I have a random idea. If you're not sure where to begin, Milanote has over 100 built-in templates for you to get started on any type of creative project. And they will have a bunch of ideas for what that could look like for you. So if you're interested in trying Milanote out, it is free to sign up and there's no time limit on it. Create a free account with a link in my description and your next creative project will thank you. Off the record, I often read that people find it difficult to use Milanote long term because the free version limits the amount of items you can put in it. I did experience this when I was using the free version, but I think it's pretty easy to work around. For example, if you have lots of images for a reference, just compile them in a different program and put that one image into Milanote and you can probably save like 20 blocks. I think I also tend to like waste a lot of blocks with random text, and so that stuff can all just be cut. Like, there are ways to creatively work around this if you really want to. But anyway, back on topic, with my new concept established, I tried to rework this project and promptly hit about 30,000 roadblocks. The main thing I struggle with creatively, and I feel like this is pretty common, is that I overcomplicate everything before I even start. It's basically like a defense mechanism, like I'm insecure that I can't execute simplicity well enough, so I just throw more at it to the point where it would be natural to fail. More symbols, more meaning, more themes, more planning, more world building, more research. I wouldn't say I'm a perfectionist, but I do have analysis paralysis, and it is very easy and almost natural to me to get caught in a loop of just thinking and theorizing and never actually doing anything. So my entire artistic life has been trying to figure out how to get myself out of this state, break the loop, and just make something. And the more I get to know other artists and creative people, I do realize this is extremely common, and that actually the skill of being able to take all the noise that is happening in your head, all the fantastical potential of cool things, and extract something that other people can actually understand, that is an incredibly valuable skill and one that people don't really talk about. And this is applicable to basically every area of life if you think about it. I don't really want to start eating healthy because there's so much I don't know, I need to research. I should just not try at all, right? I'll wait until I have the perfect time and situation to get started on this. But the perfect time never comes. Why are you thinking about all of these things when you haven't even been walking 5,000 steps a day? Why are you thinking about all the potential complicated fitness routines you could have when you're not even stretching in the morning? Come on. Because the truth probably is that you don't want to stretch in the morning, so you come up with this huge complicated narrative about what fitness has to be in order to avoid the really simple stuff. That is an example from my own life that could be applied to art as well. So in the case of this project, it was about the circus and the mafia, but to me those things were just too basic, even though they were the core themes of the project. I was like, oh, it can't just be about that. Everyone knows what a circus is like. Everyone knows what the mafia is already. It has to be beyond that. It has to be symbolic of some other thing. So I started throwing all sorts of themes and symbols at it, like the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. I was like, oh, I could incorporate these themes into the mafia. And then I was like, oh, the Four Horsemen could also symbolize corrupt institutions in our real world. And oh, all of the mafia circus members could be blind because it's symbolic for how they refuse to look at society or whatever. It's do you even understand what the core of the circus and the mafia is? Not just thematically or symbolically, but visually, because this is a visual project. That is not to say that these like little fun thematic or symbolic moments can't be added in later, because I think that they should be, but as the starting point of a project, that is just nuts. If you don't understand the core, the very basics of what you're doing, it is impossible to add meaning on top of that. So I had to take a step back and reevaluate. What is the core of this project? The most basic building blocks. The circus and the mafia, right? I wanted to know how these two things could combine in an interesting way. But do I really understand what these two things are? Conceptually, I do, but practically, I don't. I think this is also really common for any creative person, where you think you know what something is just because you've seen it a lot, or you've saved a lot of reference, or you think about it a lot. But if you try to draw it or iterate on it and make something creative with it, your mind goes blank because you've never actually learned how to apply it to something you're trying to make. So I called my own bluff. You don't actually know what defines the circus or the mafia enough to make any sort of design decisions based on either. And that is what this video is based on. So congrats for making it past the like 10 minutes of art angst. Now I will share with you what I did to solve all of these issues. Part 1 is definition. If you are just skipping to this part after not listening to my tragic backstory, this exercise I probably didn't invent it, definitely not, but I came up with it for myself in order to understand what makes something that thing. So in this case, we're working with the circus and mafia themes. I was asking myself questions such as, what are common patterns, textures, and silhouettes found in these archetypes? As well as, how many details can we strip away from an object or a character or an outfit before it stops reading as being associated with this archetype or theme? So my first step was to create a Pinterest board full of the most basic depictions of the circus that I could find. From stock photos to artistic renditions. What do all of these things have in common visually? And whenever I notice something, I will just draw it in my sketchbook. And I'm just doing this traditionally because I was feeling the vibes that day. But I think that this like deconstruction of elements is really crucial to understanding what makes something that thing. Because as artists, sometimes we can be really attracted to like processed images that are basically already art. Like we want to draw the Pinterest reference that is like a pretty elaborate costume or a beautifully designed mask when it comes to the circus anyway. But if you only draw like renditions of photos and don't really look at the individual elements within that costume or that photo, you're missing the opportunity of like distilling this element for you to take to the next thing that you're going to make. So this is really about finding patterns of the patterns. And I spoke previously about this fear of being basic with your designs or your art, because I certainly have this conception that simple thing equal bad, or like basic thing equal bad. If clown has big red nose, there's no way I'm drawing clown with big red nose, because that is just way too simple, right? But it is important to identify these things because they are in the collective unconsciousness. And if you can harness that, it will be very easy to make design decisions later. So for example, for the circus, I was noticing that stripes were a huge part of what made circus aesthetic, especially red and white stripes. But it didn't always have to be red and white. It could be red and black, white and green, white and blue, and usually they had to be vertical stripes. Horizontal stripes don't really read as circus for whatever reason. Another thing that I found was very common was masks or face paint. So when there was a character like a clown character, jester character, any sort of performer, they would always have really extreme face paint, like either super ashy and white makeup with very stark contrasting cheeks, or eye makeup, or emotions that are drawn onto the face. Like they will erase the eyebrows completely, or they would erase them and draw them into the emotion they're trying to express. Another common pattern that I found was diamonds. So obviously red and white diamonds, red and black diamonds. Triangles were also very common. And at the end, after I've distilled all of these elements, like red, white, with some other third color, stripes, diamonds, and triangles, I start going a little bit crazy, like experimenting with different combinations of these patterns and colors, just to see how far I could go before it stops reading as associated with the circus, or just to see what I can come up with on my own with these elements. Because just studying something and knowing something isn't really enough. You have to take these things and try to come up with something new, or else you haven't really learned it. This is why it's not enough to just save reference, you have to study it in this way. I kind of see like drawing, the act of drawing, as the act of saving something to your memory for later use, like adding words to your vocabulary. But if you never practice putting together a new sentence, you won't know how to use those words. So that is what we're kind of doing at the end here. So some questions I was asking myself was like, if I had just a blank ball, like a blank sphere, what singular thing could I put on it for it to be circus related or whatever related? For example, I was thinking about Wicked. Wicked is about a witch. Nobody's gonna harp on Wicked for putting the main character in a witch hat. That's what makes her read as a witch, right? And her green skin. If the designers of Wicked were like, oh, witch hat is too basic, we need to make her something special. So for example, you could just take a blank ball, make it green, and put a witch hat on it, and that would be Wicked. For the circus, I was thinking, if you just put vertical red and white stripes on it, it's possible that that would just read as circus. But I think that the ball shape is a bit misleading. Circus has many other shapes associated with it. It's not just patterns and colors. And so the next thing I decided to do was study the silhouettes that were common in circus costumes and characters. First of all, lots of hats, top hats, and lots of like ruffled collars that erased the silhouette of the neck, and also lots of sleeves that either puffed out dramatically at the shoulders or puffed out dramatically at the wrist. Oddly shaped headwear seemed to be a very common theme, as well as interesting corsets that flared out into dramatic skirts. But either way, it's pretty clear that the silhouette of a circus performer is going to be very distinct from just a person you're gonna see on the street. After that, I moved on to the mafia, and this was both more challenging and a lot easier than the circus because the mafia is kind of one note in its visual themes. While I was studying the silhouettes and the shapes and the colors associated with the mafia, I was like, girl, I think it's just black. And they all look the same. They're all wearing hats, and they're all in like suits and trench coats. There are not really any other colors or patterns here. The few that I could distinguish, that I could like pull for like in the collective unconscious, I guess, that I've seen again and again is like maybe the aesthetic of luxury contrasted with the aesthetic of crime. So for example, a luxury watch on a wrist of a hand that is covered in tattoos, but also they have expensive rings. And yeah, in my opinion, it's super basic. I'm like, I've seen this on Wattpad. This is what the Wattpad authors use as their like inspiration image for their hot mafia daddy. Like, do I want to use that as my reference? Not really, but is that what people associate with mafia? Yes, unfortunately. So I do have to note that, that tattoos and luxury if I'm really grasping for what defines something as mafia and not just guy in suit. Something else that I found common was that they'd frequently be smoking like a cigar, or they'd be holding some sort of gun. And I do think that a lot about both the circus and the mafia is the acting of the character, the attitude. Because sometimes the only thing that distinguishes guy in suit from mafia guy is how they're acting and who they're with. So I made note of that. That is very important, like the attitude that this character is going to end up having. I also made a note of like the patterns sometimes associated with this. It's like something gaudy, something that says, I want to be seen as wealthy. For example, like animal print. I even started looking at like Yakuza aesthetics, like if I can't find anything in the Western mafia, it's gotta be like, maybe I'll look at the Japanese mafia. But either way, after drawing like 5 guys in suits who all look the same, I got a little bit tired of that, and I was like, I think we can move on from this to the next step. Step 2 is to mix it all up. Now we know what defines this visual theme. What patterns, what shapes, what silhouettes, what colors, and I'm going to really start to challenge those ideas. And since I have 2 very opposing thematic elements here, I'm going to try to mash them up in a strange and interesting way. I told myself to create 4 circus-related silhouettes, but I had to use only mafia-related colors and patterns to fill it in. And then I had to create 4 mafia silhouettes, but fill it in with only circus colors and patterns. And hopefully the result would be a mashup that is truly the crossover of a circus and a mafia. So as you can see on screen, to do this I've made my color panel really huge because frequently when I'm working digitally, I forget that colors exist. But for the circus, colors are so important. It's like very definition of a circus. So I made it huge so that I would remember to use colors, which is ironic because we are starting with the colors of the mafia, which is essentially just black and white. So for this exercise, I was really thinking about the proportion of black and white of the mafia outfits and where they usually lie and how I could apply those to a circus themed silhouette. So for the jester, I gave him a little triangle of white for the suit, and I gave his like ruffle cuffs a white color because if this was a mafia person, typically in a suit, the outside suit would slide up and you can see a little bit of the white interior long sleeve. And I certainly wouldn't have come up with that if I was just drawing a jester or just drawing a mafia guy. For the rest of them, I was struggling a little bit. So as you can see, these silhouettes are jester, clown, some sort of female performer, and then some sort of like mysterious robed figure. Because the mafia is very uniform in their appearance, I was like, doesn't that mean I just give every single one of them a suit? And that would be appropriate? And I do think that could be appropriate. But I did also try to be a little bit more creative with how I was interpreting. For the clown, I'm definitely going to go back to him because he is too circus-like and not really fitting into the mafia theme. For the third one, I give her tattoos, and hopefully that is enough to move her away from circus and more towards mafia. For the last figure, I was having a lot of trouble because there are some things you just really can't excuse about a silhouette. For example, those dangly fabric bits really don't make any sense for any sort of mafia related outfit, so I just ended up erasing them. For her, I really ended up emphasizing the gaudy animal fur coat, and hopefully that was enough. She's not my favorite though. So after that, we move on to the mafia silhouettes with the circus colors. Let me tell you, I was struggling figuring out how to make distinct mafia silhouettes because as far as I could tell from my reference images, they're all the same guy. They're all the same guy with their little hats and their little suits and their little guns. So, you know, I tried my best to make them all a little bit distinct in how their shapes are and started filling in these colors. This was both challenging and fun question mark. It was a little bit hard to use white, red, and another very common color, blue, without it reading as like potentially political, but I hope I did a good job. I like how the first guy turned out. The second guy I was having a lot of trouble with, and I think he turned out a little bit too basic. I do like some of the in-process things that I'm seeing here, but another thing that I was thinking during this whole process is that both Mafia and Circus tend to have characters that all feel one note to me. Like they're all like freaks, right? They're all like crazy people or like weird or edgy. I never found myself that attracted to stories relating to the circus or the mafia because I'm like, oh, this is just an edgy circle jerk. Like, there's nothing interesting here because there's no range. So I was really trying to make characters that would have range in their personalities, if not through the designs, perhaps through the sketching and acting I'll do in the final step. I will say the third character here surprised me because the silhouette, it gives me like edgy Wattpad male lead vibes, but I was like, oh, I'm just gonna make him a silly little tin soldier type character, and I was like, that actually works pretty well. For the last character, she was kind of giving me trouble. I was like, okay, we kind of like need a woman in here. So I created a woman in a fursuit with dogs. But the way the cape was attaching to her was kind of bothering me the entire time. I wasn't into it. So I didn't end up moving forward with her. I will say, in conclusion, I'm pretty proud of how these all turned out. I was not expecting it to go like this. But I feel like I've always known, and it's always taught to us that like creativity is when two things that shouldn't meet are meeting. For example, a rat that cooks, a panda who does kung fu, and a bee who falls in love with a human woman. Like, these are things that should not happen, but when you put them together, it is pretty fun. So it's not like I'm surprised that creativity is doing its job, but it's more like, wow, I did that? Cool. And you can too. The third and final thing that I did in this process was just start sketching these characters in various angles and poses. In my opinion, this is where the character really starts to come alive and become more than just a stale design. I do think it's understated how much of character design is about acting and gesture and expression. A lot of times I believe that people think that design is like pure design, and it can be, but like how the character moves and how they behave is also a huge part of who they are, which is ultimately what character design is. My rule of thumb, if I don't know exactly where to start, is that I will just do a close-up on their face and also one of their side profile, and then one where they're doing some sort of action with their hands. That usually covers enough bases for you to understand how this character wants to behave. So the jester character, I'm picturing that guy as more of like an accountant type who likes to be prim and proper and is taking care of business that he doesn't really care about, but is gonna get done because it needs to be. And then the guy with the clown silhouette and the mohawk hair, he's a little bit more laid back and chill, probably doesn't like getting his hands dirty and will let other people do the dirty work. And for Mr. Ronald McDonald with the striped hat, I picture this guy as like being large and intimidating, but actually having more of a gentle personality. For the Tin Man guy, I don't really know about him. He's just kind of like a black box to me. This character escaped me a little bit. He seems to just be serious, is the vibe I'm getting. Perhaps just a soldier type, which is befitting the tin soldier archetype. For the lady in the top hat, she seems to be more of a typical showman. And for the last one, this like typical looking guy with the K-pop hair. This one gave me trouble because he has K-pop hair and I'm like, that's not very silly of him. But I do need a cutie patootie in every lineup, so his job is to be cute. that's about it, because none of the other ones are like giving cute right now. So there has to be one, and it's him. So with the line art done, it's time to move on to the color, which was absolutely crucial for this specific project anyway, because color is such a huge part of making something read like a circus, or a mafia in that case. Now, I have always been a little bit insecure about color, and I don't like teaching it because something about color theory, I just don't trust it. I'm like, it's just all vibes, right? So I tried to just follow what the vibes were telling me in my heart. Like, in my opinion, you can learn as much theory as you want about color, but in the end, it's gonna really just be about how you want this to feel. And even though Mafia is black and white, I wanted it to be colorful regardless. So I made sure that the black was not pure black and the white was not pure white, so that there was room to mess with those hues and values later. Another thing I found common when it comes to making something look like the Mafia is that frequently their hats will cast shadows, and basically the lighting is very important in making something read as like menacing or crime related. So I made sure to put some emphasis on that. And while the concept of a dark circus is certainly nothing new, it was very fun to explore this in my own way. I did not expect this sketch page to come out in the way that it did, and it does show me a little glimmer of potential as to where this could possibly go next, because at this point I've barely tapped into this like visual library, if you want to call it that. Like, for the last 10 years on this project, the visual aspect of it has always escaped me, or it's just not something I thought was super important. I was always like, oh, I'm just gonna write something super cool, and it doesn't really need to look super cool as long as the story is good. But I am interested in how this could manifest visually. Like, that's kind of the whole point of mashing the circus and the mafia together. Like, are you serious? So even though these characters may not be directly related to what happens in the story, it does show me a potential direction that the look could take. And doing this exercise has given me permission in a way to keep on mashing concepts. For example, we don't have to stick to Western circus depictions. We can expand into like Chinese opera or Japanese kabuki. And it would be very easy to continue doing this sort of exercise with any combination of visual themes that you want to explore. For example, I'm just thinking like robots and maybe like Y2K fashion, or military and what's the opposite of military? Like flowers. That would be kind of crazy. Study military silhouettes and flower silhouettes and see what happens. One thing that I was thinking about, and I would say the end of my advice is like over at this point, I'm just gonna keep yapping, is that the Fatui Harbingers from Genshin are kind of like a circus mafia, if you think about it. Like, they are supposed to each represent like a character that you would find in a European like comedy from the 16th century or something like that. And they're part of this criminal organization, and overall it's like pretty on theme. But if you look at them, I would say it's very difficult to discern that they're supposed to be themed in this way, and that's not very surprising for Genshin, I'm gonna be honest. Like, Genshin and Hoyo designs rarely make sense to who they are. Anyway, aside from that, I'm sure there are a lot of circus mafia themed groups or characters out there. I did find quite a few, at least dark circus related characters in my search on Pinterest, and I was like, oh, this actually looks cool and interesting. I didn't know that was possible. So that also kind of gave me hope for this concept. So needless to say, my earlier frustration is no longer existent, and I have a little bit more confidence now that this could become something cool. But that's just my opinion. You can let me know in the comments if I cooked or if I didn't cook. In the end, it is also just an exercise. And for exercises, the end result shouldn't really matter too much. It's more about the process and what you learn in the process. So I hope if you're also stuck, maybe give this a try and let me know how it goes. With that said, you've made it to the end of the video. Thank you so much. And thank you to my patrons. They did see this art a little bit earlier than everyone else. And I will see you very soon in a convention vlog.